Well, so yeah, basically for listeners, the article starts by saying, kind of what it's going to talk about, and then I look into the studies in Vienna about what he learned after he left Bonn, and then I go back into Bonn and I start with Kirnberger's, actually his smaller treatise, and I think Beethoven probably studied Kirnberger's larger book as well, but there seems to be pretty clear evidence that he encountered his Grundsätze.
Okay.
Die wahren Grundsätze zum Gebrauch der Harmonie.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. Quite an influential music theorist and purported personal student of Bach, at least
Yeah,
according to his claims. So, yeah, what was the influence on Beethoven?
yeah. So Gustav Nottebohm, a very important Beethoven scholar, found on one of Beethoven's manuscripts a little notation in the top left-hand corner. This is example 4, which has been published for the first time. It was in the Vienna Gesellschaft der Musikfreunde in Vienna. So example 4 in the article. And on the top left-hand corner, Beethoven writes out a series of 3 chords and or triads, and then to the right, 7th chords. And then he writes kind of very specifically about what these chords are and the foundational chords. And the language here exactly matches Kirnberger's Grundsätze. And so I was looking at other treatises, and you see some of these chords in other treatises like Petrie's Anleitung, which Nottebohm also said this could have been a good source for Beethoven to study. But the language differs in that, and also the presentation differs slightly. So yeah, I work out these connections and show them in great detail between examples 4, 5, and 6. And so and it has to do with the nature that Kirnberger uses to write about these. And interestingly, the chords are in a Notenbeispiel, so they're at the end of the treatise, and the text is in the text proper. So Beethoven would have effectively had to combine the end of the treatise with the beginning. So then he wrote out the notation. So this is a pretty foundational concept to understand that there's only triads and their inversions, and then a 7th chord, various types, plus their inversions. And I think that this is something that Beethoven would have encountered quite early in his training. So this page is dated, I think, to 1790, but I think Beethoven encountered it very early. And if you look at the page here, you can see that the top left-hand corner has a darker ink than the rest of the page, the Klage. And so I think that this was going to be kind of his theory page. He learned these chords, then probably did lots of keyboard work, forgot about it, and then came back to it and wrote this lead. That's my interpretation of this.
Can I just ask a quick question? Was he self-taught or did he have a teacher? I know his father was tough on him.
Yeah,
He had tough, his dad was really tough. But did he have a teacher that instructed him with this book, or did he just read it
I
himself?
think so. Yeah. So in example 1, I kind of sketch an outline of Beethoven's teachers. And so Beethoven's father is known to have been hard on him, but I think also he was probably an excellent musician and probably taught Beethoven the rudiments of piano at a very early age. And it's clear that his father wanted his son to progress Beethoven that we know, because he sought out lessons for him with very important musicians. And so Tobias Pfeiffer, Willibald Koch was an organist, Gilles van der Eden, he was in the Bonn court. And we don't know for sure if Andrea Lucchesi taught him, but he was there. And so really senior Beethoven, Ludwig van Beethoven's father, was involved in the music scene quite well. And then Beethoven's grandfather was once the Kapellmeister of Bonn. So they were extremely
Whoa.
well connected in the Bonn world. And so I think,
Grandfather is the Kapellmeister. That's pretty
yeah,
well connected in music.
absolutely. And I think we see this when like Mozart, for example, Leopold was one of the best musicians in Europe. And so it's perhaps a little surprised that baby Mozart, Amadeus, would rise to such an extent, right? When you have
Yeah.
a father and family that's so well connected in the music scene. And I think the exact same thing holds for Beethoven. So it's not clear to me exactly Where or who introduced Beethoven to Kirnberger? I think there's potential that Christian Gottlob Neefe was showed Beethoven some Kirnberger, and one of the evidence that I used to make this connection is that Neefe claims that he worked with Beethoven on Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier, and if that happened, which I think it probably did, and we do know that Beethoven studied the Well-Tempered Clavier in great detail. And Kirnberger's treatise, the one I talk about, would have been very interesting in this regard because it actually includes two analyses of a prelude and fugue, and
Mm.
or is it two fugues? Anyway, it includes very sophisticated analyses of these. And so
Mm.
if Gottlob Neefe was trying to say, hey, here's how you should understand these preludes and fugues, I think Kirnberger's treatise would have been absolutely ideal. And
Mm.
I should mention that this treatise is actually not written by Kirnberger, but
Mm.
it's effectively his ideas. It's
Ah.
ghostwritten by Schütz.
Right. And is that because now I read
So
this that Kernberger, I don't know if I'm mixing up the person, but he was not perhaps as didn't he get into an argument with this? I'm going on a tangent, but he was not as eloquent or rather schooled in writing, so he had people so he dictated to people essentially. Uh,
that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know as much about Kirnberger in terms of like that side of
Okay.
things, but that could be
Okay.
it could be, and definitely he had a ghost written by Johann Abram Peter Schultz,
Hmm.
um,
That's
and
very interesting.
yeah, Beach, the who did a translation of this treatise, remarks that Schultz spent some time looking through Rameau and may have synthesized more thoughts from Rameau with Kirnberger, and Kirnberger more or less signed off on this, and so yeah, it's so interrelated
Wow.
and connected.
Wow, that's pretty. Yeah, that's very interesting. Someone should look into that. But okay,
Hmm.
so yeah, so you showed the example four. Then that's so yeah, it's very clear that there's a connection there.
Yeah,
So moving on from that, you want to talk a little bit about fundamental base theory now
yeah,
with
absolutely.
from that
So
treatise? Yeah,
yeah, for those who are interested and want to follow along in the article, I love that this article is open access, by the way, on Music Theory Online. It makes it
yeah.
so much easier to share and look over. So yeah, the fundamental bass is an idea from Rameau, and it's essentially the idea that an inversion of a chord still has the same fundamental bass. So if we take a triad and invert it twice, we can still say that the fundamental bass exists. And Kernberger calls it the Grünbass. So in example 8, you can see he shows the different chords and then how the bass note changes, the basso continuo, but the Grünbass or the fundamental bass stays the same. Now, I think this is a really important concept because it affords, as I see it, the concept of harmonic prolongation. And I initially, for quite a while, I got on the kind of anti-Roman numeral train, if you want to call it that. And I think that the pushback against Roman numerals was a very appropriate reaction. I think for a while we went really deep into Roman numeral analysis and kind of, in some sense, lost
Hmm.
the plot a little bit. But then I think that a complete excision of Roman numerals was
Just
maybe
throwing the
when the
baby out with the
pendulum went too
bathwater.
far.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I think maybe we can kind of bring it back a little bit. Now, I don't think Beethoven actually would have explained much in terms of Roman numerals. And when we look at Mozart, we don't see many Roman numerals, but we do see the fundamental base. And
Hmm.
all that a Roman numeral does is assign the scale degree, it very explicitly, to the fundamental base. And so it's not far to go from fundamental base to Roman numeral theory. It's very,
Hmm.
very close. And so if a composer understands deeply the fundamental base, as I think Beethoven did, and then Mozart and all these guys, I think you're also thinking in the sense that we use Roman numerals to model that thought about the movement of the fundamental base.
Hmm. So this is Kernberger, and this is from that treatise. Or is this
Correct.
mentioned by Notabum? Okay, I see. As mentioned by Notabum. Okay.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
not a bum connected this treatise to this manuscript, and then I basically said, how accurate is this connection? I verified his claim about the chords that Beethoven wrote, and then looked into this treatise and examined it closely and said, do we see expressions of these ideas in Beethoven's works?
Hmm.
And so as I was going through the treatise and I was looking at Beethoven's earliest piano sonatas, so that he wrote at the age of 13, his Elector sonatas, I
Hmm.
discovered some patterns in Beethoven's sonatas in the main theme that are unusual compared to Beethoven's later works, namely a descending thirds progression and root position. But I found it very prominently in Kirnberger's treatise. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And so I looked at the first sonata and I saw that connection. And I looked at the second sonata and saw the same pattern. And the fact that we don't see that pattern in Beethoven's later works suggests to me that Beethoven may have been kind of, maybe Nefa or someone said, hey, you should compose some themes using this descending thirds progression that you see in this Kirnberger. Like, let's see what you come up with. And maybe these were kind of a product of that.
Now you speak of harmonic prolongation. Isn't that a Schenkerian term?
It is a Schenkerian term, but well, we encounter it most often when we study Schenkerian theory. So this is in section 2.9, and I talk about here. So Kirnberger does not use the word prolongation, and I don't think Beethoven would have used the word prolongation. Instead, what Kirnberger says is durchgehende Akkorde, so like through going chords, and basically what I do here is he also calls them passing chords, and so I go into how Kirnberger introduces the idea that some chords are subordinate to other chords, and so he effectively establishes the idea that if we move from, let's say, a a tonic harmony in root position into a tonic harmony in first inversion. So in Roman numerals, it'd be 1 to a 1/6,
Mm-hmm.
or in figured bass, it'd be scale degree 1 going to scale degree 3 with a figured bass 6/3. That the intervening harmony constructed on scale degree 2, and I think we can see this in maybe
Oh
example
yeah.
10.
Okay.
Um, and he builds it up here. It's really nice. He shows that in example A here, that we just have the D as a melodic passing tone in the bass. And
Mm-hmm.
then if we start harmonizing that, we create a passing chord. So the entire chord is subordinate to the other chords. And so this is theoretically and quite simply the prolongation. Like, this is an explanation for prolongation. Now, so all of the ideas are there. The specific language is not.
Mm-hmm.
And this led me to ultimately to Joel Lester's position. And Joel Lester, I quote him. He says, musicians understood what they were doing, or to put it another way, that musicians did not have to await posthumous theories and the posthumous development of analytical tools in order to understand what it was that they had been doing. And so I guess here what I'm trying to say is that when we analyze Beethoven, we say, oh, look, this is a tonic prolongation, for example, that Beethoven himself would have understood it in a similar way without maybe using the exact same meta language.